go again. It's episode 5 of Hockey 101. Hey guys, I've kind of been playing a little bit of golf here this week in Florida. Any message from the Division One hockey commissioners or the Division One world to control the narrative?
I'll tell you, there's no control of the narrative. I don't think anybody from that world has taken action from any of the tips and tools that they were provided last week, Bob. But I think they'll be listening soon, especially as we dig in this week. And I do want to check in on you. Any frostbite from the weather down here, the temperature in Florida out there on the golf course? Like, I'd imagine it was tough.
It's in the 60s this week. It's not good.
It's
Not good.
winter. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any complaining right now.
Go back to Jersey and watch the drones fly over your house. We promised last week we'd get into name, image, and likeness. Sometime down the road, I think we'll get into the Alston money, but the fun stuff is the name, image, and likeness. And this is what this podcast is all about, guys. So let's have a healthy conversation about NIL. And I just want to preface everything when we start. We are no experts on NIL, but quite frankly, and you'll hear a lot more about it this week or this podcast as we go through. I talked to I've talked to two now of the people who run the largest collectives in Division One sports, nothing to do with hockey whatsoever. And I can tell you, they're in the dark as well. Nobody knows where this thing's going. It's the wild, wild west out there. You know what I mean, Dan?
Yeah, and you see it, Bob. I mean, it's the wild, wild west in every other sport in college sports. I mean, whether you're talking football, basketball, whatever, but you tend to have a world that you live within that you can recruit against in those worlds. If you're Arkansas State, I don't have to recruit against Alabama directly. I'm in the Sun Belt Conference. I play that conference schedule. I make my television money off of winning the Sun Belt potentially and then playing in the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl at the end of the year. I don't need to win a national championship to keep my model going. In college hockey, Bob, there are only so many teams, and you've got makeshift conferences with the haves and the have-nots, as you've called them before, all participating in that same player pool. NIL money is a challenge unlike any other when it comes to the world of hockey.
So last week we said we were just going to dig a little bit deeper into this, and we established that if D1 hockey programs didn't establish their own collectives or refine the collectives that they have, and then aim those collectives at division or at NHL bound players who are 17 and 18-year-olds, there would be a big problem. Each school needs to find their pagula like Penn State did, and the smaller donations will follow. And we'll talk about donations off the two conversations that I had with the collective people this week. I think the point that I really want to start out making, though, is any D1 can be a blue blood if they have no money. Makes sense, Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wide open world. It can be good, as we've talked about. It can be good for expanding the game. It's players and money that some schools may not have had access to. But the problem is that it's an open world. Anybody can kind of do whatever they want.
And anybody can be rich if they win the lottery too, Bob.
I bought 2 tickets because it's getting up there this week. So the bottom line is they need to raise money. They need to shoot those arrows right at those NHL-bound players. And the last thing that we talked about last week, College Hockey Inc. Get us more information than what you had. Set the narrative. You're out there for the narrative. Tell the players, tell the agents, because I can tell you the agents don't know that much about no money either, because I've been on the phone with them all week in between, golf games. And just define it for everybody. Let everybody know generically. I mean, you can't get into the X's and O's for each school, but generically let people know what the specifics are. So tonight's all about, even though we're not experts, okay, but we know more than most, tonight is about kind of getting into the weeds a little bit with this NIL. And I will say this, because it was said to me by the one person I talked to last night. NIL is like artificial intelligence. It's here. It's getting better. And nobody knows how it's going to turn out. Right, Lucas? Nobody.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it can really go either way, but I think like AI, how it turns out is incredibly dependent on the powers behind it, the powers that be, right? It can either be used to make things better or it can be used to make things worse. And it's gonna have to make a decision soon.
So let's define the two people that I talked to. And like a lot of people, they just want to remain anonymous. They want to stay behind the scenes. Nobody wants to get out in front of this or have their name associated with anything yet. But like I mentioned earlier, they're in charge of two of the largest nil programs, and primarily they're dealing in football in all of college sports. And they just right off the bat, we talked about anonymity.
Yeah.
We'll give you what you want, but keep our names out of it. So let's start with what led to nil. Lucas, if you could run that video of Donald D. LaHaye, the Central Florida kicker, who had a podcast, was making money, and was asked to stop. And if you could run that, that would be great. And we'll kick off after that.
For more, we welcome in our college basketball analyst, Jay Billis. Jay, you're obviously a social media star in your own right, but what are your thoughts on this situation with Donald De La Haye?
Well, it's typical of the NCAA amateurism rules that an athlete is not allowed to use his or her name, image, and likeness to promote a product or to make money. And the NCAA and the member institutions will tell you that that this is a slippery slope, it's Pandora's box, things like that, because they would tell you that schools could use these businesses to all of a sudden funnel money to players, and then you would have bidding wars. I don't find that particularly persuasive. First of all, the idea of a bidding war is only used with an athlete. It's never used with coaches or administrators that are making all this money. That's just called business and market forces. When it's an athlete, then all of a sudden it's a bidding war. And the other part of it is players can have jobs. So if De La Haye decided that he wanted to be a waiter at a local restaurant, if UCF boosters wanted so badly to get money to him, they could go into that restaurant and leave him $1,000 tips. There are all kind of ways to do that, and it's easily policed. So all of these legitimate businesses that a player or a student athlete, as the NCAA would call them, could run, could be easily policed for their legitimacy. But the NCAA doesn't want to do it. They don't want the players to have anything while we're running this multi-billion-dollar business where everyone but the athlete can make whatever their value is in this gigantic marketplace.
He quit the team because he was making too much money after on the podcast, and soon after, the litigation began that started nil officially in June of 2021. So, what are the regulations surrounding nil? And I took this right from the NCAA website, and I kind of giggled when I read it, guys. So let me just look at my notes here. NCAA rules allow athletes to receive compensation for use of their name, image, and likeness. However, nil activities may not be used to compensate an athlete for athletics participation or achievement. Don't laugh, not yet, don't laugh, because then in brackets they have i.e. pay to play. Okay, take it away.
Yeah, I think, Bob, you covered this a bit last week when you mentioned the hiring of Andrew Luck, former Colts quarterback, as general manager for Stanford football. I think we cover this when you look at a young man who on every surface of his wanted to play quarterback at LSU as the number one quarterback commit in the country. Committed, recommitted again until $13 million of, just compensation, we'll call it, not pay to play, comes from a billionaire that we'll talk about later in this pod. Bob, it's a wild world, and to try to say it's not pay to play is legalese that I've never heard.
So it's true a player like the kicker can start a pod and make money from advertising because they have a following. And I mean, that to me is name, image, and likeness. Or I know you guys don't know this young lady, but Livy Dunn from LSU, the
New
gymnast.
Jersey too.
Is she a New Jersey girl?
Jersey,
There
and
you
yes,
go.
from
How did
South
she end
Jersey.
up at LSU? So, anyways, so she has a massive following on social media and she parlays that. But we're talking a couple of athletes here. I mean, most of them don't have that, right? So, therefore, isn't this really pay to play? And when I talked to the one collective operator last night, he said in capital letters, of course it is. Let's stop kidding ourselves. So then, how does the high school senior who has no pod and no social media, and he doesn't know anybody in the area of the school that he's going to, how does he get, how much money did he get, Dan?
10 million on the books. They say 13 million because a hero of mine, Dave Portnoy, might have been involved.
So, can we just say what it is? This is pro sports right now. I mean, imagine for a second the NHL with no salary cap. Oh, by the way, imagine if everybody was a free agent at the end of the year, like the portal allows. The Rangers, the Leafs. You want to name your next 5 richest teams? The National Hockey League would end up being the Dodgers and the Yankees, where the teams who have the most money every year compete for the championship. Juan Soto, yesterday, 15 years, $765 million. That's what we're talking about here. No salary cap, right? And so a high school senior, is he from Florida, Dan?
I don't
I
know.
think he's from Florida.
Let's find it.
I think he's from Florida with no social media following. And I'm sure he doesn't know anybody in the community at the University of Michigan, ends up getting 10 to 12 million dollars. D1 athletics is pro sports. Both of them said that. Plain and simple. Right, guys? Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing something. Unlike many athletes who are making this money will soon enough be missing classwork and classes because it is hard to make $13 million and make it through the avenues that you're going to have to make it with NIL and have time to go to class while you're also competing as a Division I hockey player or football player or basketball player or baseball player. That's the biggest thing people keep forgetting is that these are still, as Teddy Roosevelt once called them when he started the NCAA, student athletes.
Listen, I'm sure the schools are going to try to do their very best to assist these kids to stay academically eligible. But I mean, it's pro sports, guys. Let's just call it what it is. So I had a list of questions for both of them, and I'm kind of going to go through them just a little bit. And one of the first questions I had was explain a collective. How did they form? Are they registered? Are they regulated? Are there financials? What about the IRS? And again, I went and used AI, which we talked about earlier, and ran that definition by both of them. And they said, yeah, that's basically it. A collective is an organization formed to benefit student athletes. You want me to stop right there? Of course it is. Usually at a specific institution. These collectives are usually created by alumni or other supporters of a school who have the necessary capital to start them, aka find your pagula. The collectives generate nil deals for athletes at the school that it supports, but it is still its own independent, separate entity from the school. These collectives are sometimes used to pay players they like and keep them on their team. It sounds like this is the National Hockey League.
Yeah.
So he said, It all started with fan clubs, large boosters giving money for exclusivity to players and events. And then it evolved. And what I want you to keep in mind here is it's evolved really fast and it keeps spinning. It's like a geometric progression. It's just not stopping. So it evolved into the collectives associated with the schools, made up of boosters who could legally pay players now. Not that they ever did before, of course. We know that would never happen. Now, remember, I'm talking about football players and basketball players. So they could pay these players directly through businesses for their name, image, and likeness. Then the portal came in. And guys, both of them said that this now turning it into pro sports and introducing the portal was like taking gasoline and just spraying it on the fire, because now everybody was a free agent. It used to be if players wanted to change schools, they had to sit a year until they competed again. But now with the portal, they're essentially free agents, as we said, after every year, and they don't have to sit out a year. As this was happening, the schools who didn't have collectives quickly formed them, because if they didn't have them, they weren't getting the best players.
Yep.
And then their boosters said, hey, what's going on here? We used to have championship teams here, or at least teams that were in the postseason, and now we don't. Then you add the next thing, agents. Because agents who are giving, oh, hold on, are they agents or are they advisors or are they consultants? I'm not sure, okay? But when you give agents, free agents, with all kinds of collective money out there, do you know what that leads to, Lucas?
Absolute disaster.
Bidding wars.
Chaos.
I might have jumped the gun a little bit, Bob, by saying an absolute disaster, but that's what it is. Like, I feel like I've been constantly laughing this entire episode at everything you've pointed out, because to me, the whole thing seems insane when you put it back to back like this, especially when you consider that it's not like this has happened over the course of 50 years and no one's just seen it happen. It's happened so quickly that everyone should be able to make this connection. Everyone should be able to see that the money is poisoning the student part of student athletes to a laughable degree. And you get advisors, agents, consultants, collectives who aren't attached to the schools. I mean, come on. It's insane.
Lucas, I don't think it's insane. And we'll talk about, well, maybe it is right now, but we'll talk about how to get some sanity back into the system.
Doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be.
A little bit later. Okay. I'm happy that these kids are making all this money. I can see both sides of the argument, the ones who don't want it and the ones who do. But let's get back to the agents, because they have athletes who are playing college sports. You know what else they have? Athletes that are in high school who are about to play college sports. And what the collective guy said was, now they realized it's just not for these college athletes. It's for all our kids that we've been recruiting since they've been sophomores in high school, so we could represent them all the way through, in their case, the NFL draft. Of course, they don't have agents, right? I mean, so now you've got kids in school involved in this, and you have kids out of school. He said at first, raising collective money was difficult, but as the competition ensued and schools looked at their win-loss record, boosters filled the collectives. And it was an endless well. Now I'm talking football, not hockey here, guys.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, both of them were educated somewhat on hockey, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But he said the collectives tend to be nonprofits to give the boosters the tax deductions for the money that they are donating. So they have that with the IRS. The collectives are not registered with the NCAA, and it's kind of all out there. I mean, there's like no regulation at all, it seems. And again, we're not experts, but these two guys are experts, and they're saying nothing's regulated. I'm going to give you just one example on regulation. And I'm not a regulation guy because I'm a free market guy. Markets solve all problems. In the CHL, when they had to compete with Division One hockey, as kids started to trend that way in the late 80s and the 90s, they came up with the schoolboy packages. And what happened when they weren't all rowing the boat in the same direction, and the teams were taking care of paying the players, some teams didn't pay the players. So what happened was they brought it all in-house. And I'll just speak for the Ontario Hockey League right now. When you sign a player to a contract, that contract goes to the league office, and the money that has to be put towards his education has to go in escrow, so that they don't have the bad media that you had with the kid that went to Florida as a quarterback. No, he started out at Miami, and then I think he went to Florida, and I think he's out in Arizona right now, and there's a big lawsuit involved with it.
Yeah.
I don't know specifics, but they're just, both of them said there's really just nothing governing this. So, and then he said, raising money for the collectives has sometimes been difficult because the donors that they're raising money from are also the same set of donors that are donating to the school. And did I say school? Oh, and the education part of whatever academic institution it was. So there was a little bit of a boxing match going on with these donors. Then the other guy said the athletic programs need, and they have this at the football level. I don't know if they have this at the college hockey level. I don't believe they do, but they need a dedicated person to run their NIL and find their Pagula, and then find the ones underneath the Pagula. Two takeaways from kind of what this nil thing is. Both of them said nil money is going to come in much greater ways to Division One hockey, which I think is a good thing, because it's a major sport in the U.S. and it's a growing sport in the U.S. And because of the competition between the D1 teams themselves in hockey. Dan, Lucas, Bob, we all run our own Division One teams. We're the general managers. And I just offered a kid 20. And Lucas, you really love him. What's your number, Lucas? 30.
Yeah.
Don't forget about Dan out in the West.
Yeah.
Dan's been watching this kid since he's been 14. It's 40. I go back to the advisor, agent, whatever, and say, hey, I'm not going to be in this process. Just tell me what the number is and don't lie to me, because I know those people. I'll find out the answer. But at the end of the day, I'll match whatever you have. And that's how it spins, kind of out of control.
Yeah,
Right?
Bob,
Lucas, yeah.
before we kind of dig into solutions and answers and everything, as somebody who has a pretty solid understanding of just the framework of what governs the NCAA and how it's governed, one of the biggest frustrations for me always has been the response to pushback from the NCAA in recent years, in the last decade or so, after decades of we're protecting the players, we're protecting the student athletes, we're protecting amateurism, and we're ensuring that these student athletes are treated as such and given a safe environment to grow and develop in. That was the push forever. But in the last decade, it has turned into a world of there's a lot of money to be made. So when legality pushes back, we put our hands up on the roller coaster and just go down a hill and see what happens. And what really is frustrating to watch is the same things. Title IX on itself is not a bad piece of legislation in the NCAA when used correctly. But when you look at Title IX, it's one of the things that has put a lid on growth in sports like ice hockey, both men's and women's, because it is difficult to field teams, it costs money, and it's hard to balance a men's ice hockey roster if you do not build a women's team and change and turn at the same time. So what happens in that past stops hockey from growing. Then you lift the lid off of the world with this NIL and you start shrinking the game even more with the likes of the AICs of the world that cannot compete with the University of Michigan or Ohio State or Arizona State when it comes to nil money that flows into these schools that have 100,000 seat facilities for football and 30,000 seat facilities for basketball. What it is doing to sports that it doesn't intend to do solely for what it thinks it's helping is the disappointing part. There are more student athletes than gentlemen in football pads throwing the pigskin around at the Division One FBS level. There are other athletes out there, and those athletes are the ones who are being harmed. There are the great ones that will get paid anywhere. The Livy Dunns will get paid anywhere they go. The Caitlin Clarks will get paid anywhere they go. That's great. Those people, for those folks, it's great. But for the whole in the game of hockey, this is a difficult argument. So I'm excited to hear kind of the solutions or maybe a path of where we go now with NIL money and how this whole thing's going to work.
Let's touch on a couple other things before we get to some solutions. The solutions are so obvious, it's ridiculous, okay, when we get to it. But let's go through a couple other questions that I had for both of them. I said, is there an NIL budget at the schools that you're at? Did you just shake your head to that? Who sets it and who's accountable? And they said there are budgets, but the GM and coach just can keep going back to the well. And for the most part, at these two big schools, they'll just keep filling the bucket, not with water, but with cash. They both said the athletic departments, and certainly not the coaches, typically who are not business people in both cases, should never be running the nil budget and negotiating contracts. Eddie, take it back to the NHL. The GMs are responsible for the salary cap, for the money, and they put the team on the ice that the coach then coaches. And that is my biggest worry in college hockey, that if they don't have, typically they have smaller staffs, they have grown in the past years. But if they do not have people managing this and they find the donors, this could just get out of control. And when you're dealing with a large number of schools that are not revenue generators as far as hockey goes, to your point, Dan, are we going to see more AICs? And listen, I don't want to keep bringing up AIC. Take a look at the competition, which is this for the best players, which is the CHL. They've had lots of places, franchises, go out of business.
Yep.
But they've gone out of business for not because the league wasn't structured and focused and all rowing the boat in the same direction. They went out of business either because they had a bad market or because they were just incompetent. So it happens on both sides. You want to pick on somebody else? Let's pick on the NHL. Google NHL franchises that aren't around anymore. Don't do it. Don't do it. But there's lots of them. I mean, it can happen anywhere. But this is one of the reasons why when I use the word budget, accountability, yes, I want these Division One schools. I want to see them go out and raise all kinds of cash. And if they can, to meet the competition, get the best players from the CHL at 17 or 18, but they have to do it in a sensible way. Lucas, am I starting to make a little bit of sense?
You are. Um, it needs, there definitely needs to be, I'll say, an adult in the room. I think that's been a theme of what Hockey 101 has been about, is there needs to be some kind of adult that throws some cold water on this, or at the very least brings it up to standard. And I think the reason for that is because you talked earlier about the market solves all issues. I don't know if the market solves this issue, at least in terms of what college hockey is, right? The market solves issues when there's too many Italian restaurants in a town, right? The market will solve that issue. The best restaurants will be around. Italian restaurants, although North Jersey would disagree with you, are not like a necessity. We don't need them, right? But there needs to be a recognition that there is a need for NCAA hockey at multiple levels. Because without NCAA hockey, USA hockey as a whole, and I mean that as in the country, United States hockey, suffers as a whole because it's tough to move players up. You need the opportunities. Hockey's a growing sport. You need places for these players to go, whether it's just to get an education or more playing time or more development, what have you. So when you say the market solves all issues, the way the market does that is by shrinking. We need the opposite. We need expansion. Otherwise, the collapse starts to go in both directions. So I think that's why when you say the market solves the issue, yes, but also there needs to be recognition that we need places for these players to go. Otherwise, you use AIC as an example. That's the opposite of what we need. Schools like AIC, instead of saying, well, the market says that AIC can't support a D1 team, there needs to be somebody, a commissioner, a leader, an adult, who says AIC is a quality program. They need to be supported. We need to redirect money. We either need to cap money that comes from other schools, or we need to figure out another way to get this program to stay in D1 because we need to expand. At the very least, we can't be contracting.
So go back to what we talked about last week. If D1 aims all their arrows at getting the NHL drafted players who are 17 and 18 years old, and all of a sudden now we're taking a look 3 years down the road. Yes, did the players primarily play in the CHL before they came to Division One? Yes, but they're going to the National Hockey League as pick your mascot. Okay, pick your nickname. I'm not going to pick one right here. Then what happens is if everybody does a great job at the Division One level and they get that done, now you get to Georgia. Now you get to Florida. Now you get to UCLA. Now you have something to go out there and sell. I don't know who sells it for Division One hockey. We talked about that last week. I know who sells it in the NHL. It's Gary Bettman. I know who sells it in the CHL. It's the three commissioners, right? I don't know who is responsible for that or if there's anybody responsible for that in Division One. But if they do this part right, Lucas, there can be a huge growth. And if they can get all those players to play Division One before they go to the National Hockey League, maybe they truly do catch the eye of Gary Bettman and Bill Daly and all the owners who are alumni of all these schools, who have connections. And all of a sudden, we're seeing something at Alabama, or we're seeing something called a Duck in Oregon that's playing Division One hockey. The market will solve the problem. If the operations of the CHL are poor, they will fail. If the operations of Division One are poor, they will fail. And the definition of failure in my world is who's getting the NHL draft choices.
Yep.
Okay. I don't want to say that U-Sport, who doesn't have any NHL hockey players, is a failure. Those coaches really care in U-Sport. Those kids, they care in U-Sport. It's just they're at a different level. Hey, take it to a level that we were both at, tier 3 junior hockey. Those kids cared. There was success. We had growth in that league. I'm not supposed to be talking about that league, but we had growth in that league. But there was also teams that failed. And they probably failed because of internal operations, right? So Division One can create more spots for worldly players or American players. But I believe it all starts with NHL bound players to spur that expansion. Let me get to the next thing here that we talked about with these guys. Who writes the checks to the athlete? How is it paid? Do you guys know?
Nope.
I'll bet you I didn't know. Okay. I mean, this is something that needs to be communicated. So the contract has two parties. It's with the collective, one party, and the athlete, the other party. And the collective pays the athlete. And both of them told me they pay them on a monthly basis. No, Dan, it's not like you going to Vegas with a bag of cash. Okay.
That's what it seems like, Bob. I'll
Sounds
be
pretty
honest.
fun, though.
I
pretty
think
fun.
it is I think it is a direct deposit. Now, what they did say was, and they didn't quite understand this, and I don't quite understand it. Remember, I told you we know a little bit more than most, but we're not truly experts, and nobody is. They said things are a little bit muddied as far as how this will go in the future. That the schools, once they get their revenue share money from the lawsuit that is all going to be settled up in April or something, then they can apply to pay the players directly. And again, we were talking about football. Now, they also said something else. Some of the collectives, so there's been some reneging on deals. I'm not talking Division One hockey right now. No knowledge about that, but in football there has. And there's been a lot of media on it. So a lot of schools are taking a look at bringing the collectives in-house to make sure that these abuses and the bad media and press that goes with it doesn't happen anymore. Dan, do you really take big bags of cash to Vegas, and are they all hundies?
It's mostly like, you ever see the old change like coin holders? It's like here you go. I got my jug. I fill this up with quarters, and then I just head out. They don't usually don't let me on a plane, so I drive.
It's a My Cousin Finney. It's just a 20 wrapped around a bunch of ones.
So then there was a very contentious issue that's really going to affect D1 hockey more than the other schools, although it has affected because NCAA athletics is an international game. How do schools get around tax laws for international students? So they both said this is the really real wild, wild west again, and it's very fluid. But the one thing they both said, international players are on student visas, and on student visas, you can't earn an income in America. So everybody, just like when the salary cap is set or the collective bargaining is set, everybody in the NHL or the NFL is looking for that little niche, that little crack in the wall, so that they can get around it. And one of the things they're doing right now, and I'll talk about Canadians because that's the majority of players that we're going to be talking about. What they have to do is they have to do an event in Canada, and then they can get paid for that. So one of the common things that you'll see, and I think you'll see more of it, is preseason games between U Sport and Division One NCAA hockey teams, and you'll see those games all in Canada. I'd love to be behind the scenes taking a look at their scheduling right now so they can get this done. Now, sounds too easy, right? There's a little kink in here that the NCAA, who's famous for making rules, both of them said, before I get to the example, both of them said, and anybody who's an NCAA guy here will laugh when I say this, the NCAA has so many rules that being compliant is almost impossible. and rarely intentional. You just break rules because you didn't know the rules were there, or the rules are contradicting one another. And one of the rules that they're talking about is something called a fair market value rule. So if I drive across the border, let's say I'm at Cornell, I take the 4-hour drive to get to Niagara Falls, New York, and I do an autograph signing. And I'm not saying Cornell has any nil money. I have no clue whatsoever what they have. I just picked them out of the blue because I like Mike Schaefer and Casey Jones. Okay. And that kid does an autograph session and he gets paid $100,000. Is that fair market value? Would you get that if you were an NHL hockey player or an NBA player? I don't know. Both of these guys said it doesn't matter. There's no way that the NCAA is going to be able to track any of this, and it's still going to go on. Further, he said, and you got to remember, they're talking about football here. There are states right now that are passing laws so that the NCAA cannot investigate what they're doing. Think about it. Whatever state you're in, typically a smaller state with a great football program, your legislature, your Congress passes a law because everybody in that state wants their football team to be great. And they don't want, Lucas, stop shaking your head. They don't want those boosters having any handcuffs on them whatsoever. He said, the guy last night said, the NCAA will approve all the deals when it comes right down to it. And there may come a time when something else goes through, but right now nobody knows what's going to happen that way. And think about all the nil deals that are being done at every level of NCAA sports, men and women, every sport. How's Indianapolis going to cover that? I mean, and if they were going to cover it, what's the fair market value on $12 million on a kid going to the University of Michigan? Now, I know that he is an American, but what happens when it's the next Power or Celebrini or Fantilli? Crazy. I don't know, guys. I mean, I'm talking to these two guys. I mean, they were an hour and a half conversations, and my head was spinning because this is their business, and it was almost like they're operating on quicksand because the rules could be changing from the NCAA at any point in time. And I'll come back to leadership here from a Division I hockey standpoint. Maybe they're doing this. Maybe all the commissioners are letting everybody know what the rules are right now. I can tell you I've talked to 17 Division I NCAA coaches. I don't think that's the case. Could be wrong, but I don't think so. We're close to solutions, guys. One more thing, I think. Agents. Oh my God, are they having a field day with this? Did I say agents? I met advisors. No, Dan. I met consultants.
Family friend.
I remember when I was running prospects, it was the first time I heard the word advisor because all those really good Canadian kids or American kids, they could not have an agent. So they were all called advisors. Now the word I'm told is a consultant. I mean, imagine from a nil standpoint, in the NHL, if after every year a player was a free agent and there was no salary cap, what would Connor McDavid be making right now? $25, $30 million? And by the way, if you're going to buy McDavid, I mean, you might as well go get McKinnon. And I think Crosby will still sign for 8.7 because he wants to win another cup. I mean, it's nuts. And here's where they're really cleaning up. One of the questions that I had for agents. So agents, let me back up. When they sign a player and they do the deal for him for his NHL deal, they're getting somewhere between 3 to 5 points on that deal. Endorsements are a different story. Endorsements are really hard to get for hockey players in the National Hockey League.
Yep.
It just right. And so the agents really do their work as far as endorsements go. And for endorsements, depending on what agency you're with, they're charging 15 to 25 points. So the question becomes, is nil a contract or is nil an endorsement? And the way that these two people told me was it's an endorsement.
Yep.
So think about the exponential growth of nil. Oh my God. This is unbelievable for agents. Now listen, I got no problem with the agents making money. I like all my friends making money. Dan, that bag $100, I want Caesars not to be able to make the payroll the next time you go to Vegas, right?
Yep.
But the agents, the advisors, and the consultants, and guys, these guys are pros. They know their business. They know how to negotiate. They know how to get people bidding against one another. Every Division One coach has said to me, it will be the agents driving this. God, we need a solution, don't we, Lucas?
Yes, we do.
Or Lucas and Dan, is this the last pod? And are you about to become agents?
It sounds like the money's in it. I'll tell you what. Any players out there listening right now, I don't know. I'm not picking up the call. Don't call.
Don't call me.
It's a world that if you can hit the market at the right time, and these agents have since 2021, it's a jackpot. It's life-changing money. Did I say solutions?
It's here.
Oh my God. How about we just call it professional sports, guys? This is really, really simple. We touched on it on the last pod. It's professional. Have a players' union just like they do in all the major league sports. Something that's going to protect all these players. Forget about all the big nil money. It's going to protect them all for whatever the union wants to negotiate. Did I say that I want unions? I've never said that in my entire life, guys. But you have to have it here because what comes after the union is a collective bargaining agreement. And what comes after that is a salary cap. One of the Division One coaches said to me, the next biggest word is collusion. These schools, in order not to drive their costs through the roof, can't all sit down in a room and say, okay, guys, we're only going to spend X amount of dollars. Because you know what? And I'm not a lawyer, but I know that's against the law. So you need the union, you need a CBA, and you need a salary cap. And that makes it all legal. And Dan, to your concern, if there are teams out there right now that aren't blue bloods that do a really, really good job forming a collective, raising money, okay? Pick your poor team in the National Hockey League who can't drive revenue. I'm not going to. We know who they are. It's not going to kick them out of the game. It's going to keep them in the game. Players are going to be represented. They're going to be negotiating. That's the solution. And by the way, both of them said it is the solution and it's coming. It has to come because these schools are all going to blow their brains out as far as overspending. We've just started. And we're talking about football here. It's going to happen to a lesser degree in hockey. You can't, listen, this kid, I don't know what he got, 10, 12, $13 million at Michigan. If you've got that next guy coming up next year, it's 14 million. It's 15 million. You know the way this works.
Yeah. And here's the problem, right? You look at it, sure, you can go to professional model. Sure, you can have a players union. One of the biggest problems in this country is our school systems aren't teaching kids how to balance a budget, right? How many of these shows can you watch on ESPN 60 or 30 for 30 about players blowing all of their money the year that they become a pro? These are 22-year-olds who have graduated with a college degree, in some cases doing so, or who have left college early to become a professional and join that professional model. The problem is that professional model at the collegiate ranks, to me, is introducing the wolves to the hen houses. And it's putting young people who already are ill equipped at that time in their life to deal with something of this nature, now in an even tougher situation where they're battling and trying to decipher who the wolves are and who are the folks who are these helpful folks that want to help prop them up and make them the $13 million. What happens if Mr. Underwood goes in under center in Michigan in year one and throws 7 picks in the first 3 weeks, right? He's an 18-year-old kid now who's got a $13 million paycheck on his back as he plays and fails at Michigan. These are the worrisome conversations that aren't being had. We're only talking about the positives when it comes to what good comes from nil. I want every kid to get paid too. I don't mind the agents getting paid as well. The problem is there is a governing body. Remember those 2 words, Lucas. Governing body that is in charge of governing the bodies of these players and ensuring they're safe, ensuring they're not injured, ensuring they're not harmed, and ensuring they have a safe place to both educate and then be athletes. So yes, you can go pro. Bob, I think you're right in that. I think you can collectively bargain. I think you can have all this. I just worry at the end of the day what it looks like for the parents that are listening in right now, for their kids when they aren't successful in that model without any oversight other than they're just pros now. Let the free market decide, because like Lucas said, the way the free market tends to decide is just by making things disappear.
And here's something that's interesting, because my background, when I left college, I taught high school. I taught economics, political philosophy, and current events for 3 years at high school. I've been a tutor for the last 10 years. So obviously I'm biased towards the student part of student athlete. The reason we need a salary cap in college sports is because I just did some quick math off to the side. $13 million at the University of Michigan for in-state tuition. That is 255 full rides for 4 years of in-state tuition for $13 million. So you're telling me that all these people have all this money for sports, but none of this money shows up when you got students who want an education, when you got students who want to better their lives, first generation college students applying for student loans that are going to take 30 years to clear. You don't have money for those kids, but you can come up with $13 million out of the blue with a wave of a hand for some guy to throw a football. And then turns out he does throw 7 interceptions in his first 3 games. And now all of a sudden he's not your quarterback anymore because some guy with an Instagram account is coming out of high school somewhere else, and you find another $13 million for him. That's, I think, where a lot of my head shaking this episode comes from. When you look at the numbers and the amounts of money that are being paid for these students to be athletes, and you have people who are going to college for the reason that college was created, continuing education, professional education, to raise the academic and intellectual health of a nation. And you don't have money for that. That's where I get frustrated. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about controls, about governing bodies, about commissioners, about salary caps, about putting an end to the insanity. I don't mind students getting a piece of the pie. They're putting their body on the line for their school. Their school is making money and has been making money hand over fist off of their toil, off of their injury, off of sometimes their life-altering injuries for years. That's why NIL started. But at the end of the day, this dark money coming into schools, millions and millions of dollars to pay athletes. Where was this? I think I get real passionate about it because of my background as an educator, but there needs to be controls. There needs to be governing
Secretly
bodies.
been given to the kids in the past, Lucas. Now it's just being done publicly. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, yes, that is that is certainly true. It's always been a problem, right? They've always been. Dan, I think you told me one time, I can't remember the school, and even if I did, I wouldn't put them on blast, about players on a basketball team that used to get paid by working at a restaurant partially owned by the coach of the basketball team. And they would get paid obscene amounts of money hourly. They'd go work 12 hours a week, and that's how they'd get paid to come play. That's how it used to be done. And that's, I'm sure, how it'll be done again after there is controls put on this. But yeah, that's all. End of rant. You can have it back, Bob.
Man, he's passionate. I love it. I love it. So there's the solution. There's another solution. And by the way, most people would call my solution absolutely crazy. But both of these collective guys say it is the solution. Oh, by the way, one other thing they say from a football standpoint, once you have all of this, I'm going to whisper this. There's still going to be teams paying players under the table.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
Yeah.
Lucas, what I want you to tee up as our last little part of this name, image, and likeness is the video that we have from the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks talking about what the future may look like. And when we come back after this, it's you two guys making the comments. Run it, Lucas.
I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a number of schools selling their teams. And the reason for that...
To whom?
To folks like us. Like, we're bidding on a couple teams, I can't tell you. But in essence, what we would do is buy 51% of the team. And, I mean, I think if you look at a bunch of these programs, they're making 50, 100 million off of their football program, off of their basketball program. So it's a way for universities, by the way, because under federal law, they've got to offer scholarships in all these different sports. So they've got to update their facilities. So one of the things they want to do is sort of say, okay, great, my football program makes 100 million. We'll sell 50%, that's 50 million. Do a 10 multiple on that, 15 multiple, that's 500, 750 million. That'll come for them to sort of fix different things at the university. So you're going to start seeing more of that. What the schools need is they need money for NIL, but you can't go out and raise money for NIL because that's not a deduction, right? So that if you're giving $1 million to Michigan and you can say, I want it to go to the sports program, that's great. But if you say I want it to go for NIL, then it's not a deduction. So that's the issue.
I mean, you heard what I had to say before. I'm sure it will happen. I think that private equity is an absolute menace. One of my favorite sandwich shops, Jersey Mike's, just got bought by private equity. So I've got about 2 more months to enjoy Jersey Mike's before it gets the Red Lobster treatment. I don't. Private equity ain't the answer. Whether it will happen or not, I'm sure it will. But Dan, take it away.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is this, and I had this conversation with somebody who's pretty high ranking today, Bob, after you sent me that video, and I kind of bounced it around to some people in my avenues. And one of the biggest questions I asked to this person, if this was your money, okay, and you buy 51% of University of Michigan athletics, let's just use them. We've talked about them a lot tonight. What happens to the rowing team that costs $250,000 a year to operate, not counting the scholarship athletes that you have to fill to balance your Title IX restrictions, to ensure that you can have all the men's athletes there that you're paying and all the women's athletes there that you're paying in other sports with nil money? And they went, they wouldn't exist. And that's the problem. Right? We create a world where you have an owner. The Yankees wouldn't own a men's beach volleyball team outside the building at Yankee Stadium who cost them $500,000 a year to run and operate for no reason. They would not do that. That doesn't make sense. It's not a revenue generator. That's not their job. Their job when you own something, when you own a team specifically in this case, is to make money with that product. You're going to cut the fat. What happens to the fat? Where does the fat go? What's considered the fat? At one school, wrestling is a money generator. Look at Iowa wrestling. That is a revenue generator for Iowa. That is a revenue generator for Rutgers. If you talk about wrestling at 99% of the schools in the country, that is a revenue sucker. So now you have 4 wrestling schools in Division I who are being funded by their ownership, and no one else is there. No one else is competing. So that's the problem with private equity. It's great for those who get the checks written to them. And we've seen it in other things. We've seen it in youth hockey. We've seen what it's done to the numbers in just the last 5 years and what it's doing to this great game that I guarantee you the 3 of us in this room love.
Do you know what they say a good lawyer can do?
No.
Argue both sides.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the other side.
I like it.
And the other side is not my side. It's what both of these gentlemen said to me. They said athletic directors, administrators, and coaches are not businessmen. These properties, athletic departments, many of them are underachieving. Let businessmen buy Jersey Mikes.
If you mess with my number 6, if you come after my number 6 combo, I will fight you.
I'm just telling you, they believe that they're underachieving assets and that they will churn out more profit and then be able to save your beloved rowing and wrestling teams. And by the way, the rowing and wrestling teams have an obligation, by the way, just the same as some of the D1 teams that are not revenue generators, to become revenue generators. Not just part of the school, figure out a different business model so you can put more people in your 4,000 seat hockey arena than just the 600 that you have right now. And when you put the 4,000 in, then what we're going to do is we're going to have a staff of people who are going to sell every step and every place that you could hang a sign, and they're going to put a name out front on that arena. That's what private equity will do to this. It'll save all of the sports that are not. Look at you shaking your head. Oh yeah, we got a little problem here on the pod. Hockey 101.
Your argument's like
Hockey
saying it's
Hockey 102 tomorrow.
Your argument's like saying it's broccoli's job to taste better, but it's hard to do that without covering it in butter and cheese, Bob, and making it terrible for the.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
That's it.
And in a butter and cheese? Are you kidding me?
It's.
Oh my God.
Let me take a swing at it here real quick, Bob, because I think what stuck with me is the idea that you're saying that athletic directors are not business people, and they're not supposed to be. College athletics is not supposed to be for profit. It is a service. It is a service that is provided for the students who pay you for an education. When something is a service, when something is a service, it doesn't have to make money. Now, here's the thing. Now, I understand that sports like football could make money. I understand that sports like hockey could make money. How do you do that? Butts and seats, right? Butts and seats provide you the ability to sell sponsorships. Butts and seats get you, they get you merchandising sales, they get you ticket sales, they get you concession sales, and the top 2 or 3 sports pay for the rest of it, right? The rowing team doesn't spend a ton of money, but they still spend money, and they certainly don't make money. They're not putting DraftKings ads on the sides of rowboats yet, I suppose. But I will say this, and this is how I'll finish my point, is that you don't need private equity to do that. Private equity likes to sell itself as the only way to get anything done. And why do they do that? Because it helps private equity. You don't need private equity to buy in to help your business. You know what you need to do? Hire an employee with a business degree, preferably a master's, to come be a business person that works for your program. And you don't have to sell 51% of this controlling stake in your program to do that. You pay him 120 grand a year, which is what, 10% of some quarterback from Michigan. You pay an employee to improve your business without having to sell your soul to some multinational conglomerate. So I think to say that, yes, private equity has its uses, but to say that it's the only way to generate more revenue, I think is completely misunderstanding an entire degree that these colleges sell. They sell business and marketing degrees to undergrads and then to graduate students. Hire one of those people that you just spent money creating to help you improve your business without selling your soul. I think that's at least the counter argument to the private equity argument.
It's a man who has a tattoo on his chest that says, "I escaped private equity." I really, Bob, you light me up.
Touched a nerve here, Bob.
And I love it. I love it, though. I love it. This is why this is such a good show.
Here we go. That's it for this week, guys. Let's talk. Let's get together next week and do it all over again, okay?
Hey,
sounds good
to me, Professor.
Have a great night, guys. See you later.